Hey everybody, this is Greg. Thanks for coming. Today we're just going to be taking a look at this 1000 science per minute factory, and we're just going to be turning it on. As you can see right now, all the belts are completely empty, all the assemblers are completely empty. This thing's totally shut off, so we're just going to fire it up, watch it come all the way to life. Yeah, so without too much further ado, I think I'm just going to get right into it. One of the things I really wanted to do off the bat was go ahead and just like start this video with one big red button that kind of just like turns the whole thing on. Ran into a problem with that. Essentially there is no red buttons or any sort of buttons of any kind in Factorio, so I wasn't able to do that. I was able to use the switch here, which you can see, and unfortunately I could turn the base on with a switch, but I couldn't turn it off with just one switch. I needed to get a second switch for that, and then two switches became 8 switches for reasons we'll go into a little bit later. So the factory is made completely in Factorio vanilla. It took me about 300 hours to put the whole thing together. All the blueprints are completely original. I didn't take anything offline, except for balancers, of course. So we're just going to go ahead and take a look over here. I'm going to hop into a robot and head to the south end of the base. And I just want to see if we can catch a train coming in and see what it looks like. So as you can see, the raw ore comes off the trains and it starts to go into this weaving pattern on these of these smelting columns. I call this the ore river. I wanted to go with a design that was a little more aesthetically pleasing than just the standard straight line smelting columns, which I do find to be quite boring. It doesn't have a notable loss in efficiency, though it certainly isn't better than straight line columns. I just think it looks pretty. This is a completely original design. You can go ahead and steal it. I don't really care. So we'll just go ahead and hop on one of the trains, take a little ride, see where it goes. In truth, it takes about an hour and a half for the factory to fully fire up. I am not interested in talking for an hour, nor should you be interested in listening. So we're just going to go for a ride, and I'm going to cut to continuity and try and make this look a little better. Now, all the train designs are a standard 4-lane wide, and I decided to go with an alternating configuration, meaning if you're on this one, the lanes to either left and right of you are going to have trains going the exact opposite direction. The reason why I did this is because I wanted to have that nervous feel of trains buzzing past each other at a very high rate of speeds, looking like there could be a collision at any time. Of course there's not going to be. My train rail signals are pretty good, so we're pretty safe to take this ride. Not going to be a collision today. If I wanted to go a little over 1,000 science per minute, I probably would have to redo these train signals and make the trains a little wider, or perhaps just redo the whole train system in general. I'm not really interested in doing that, so I'm going to cap it at 1.1, and that's going to be that. So we ended up at a copper outpost, but all the outposts look pretty much the same. You can tell that these 3 boxes have green wires attached to them, which means they're being read for their ore contents. It's taking an average of how much these buffered boxes are full across the whole thing, and the train station won't turn on until it reaches a certain threshold. This is because there needs to be a complete buffer ready to fill up an entire train before to let any trains come in. This prevents the train from sitting there waiting for the belts, which are much slower, to bring them ore content. Of course, trains are not supposed to be sitting there waiting at the station. I mean, I'm no Cornelius Vanderbilt, but I do know that trains are supposed to move. So we'll go ahead and take a ride back now, and we're going to try and make it back to the factory, but of course there is going to be a quick pit stop along the way at one of the stations, or one of the factory's many nuclear power plants. There are in fact 6 nuclear power plants spread throughout the factory, both here at this base and our make all base to the left. We're not going to go ahead and look at every single one. We're just going to look at one, and hopefully that's going to do the job for us. Nuclear power is the backbone of this factory's electrical energy needs. I find that most players going for a megafactory size are going either solar or nuclear. I went nuclear because the energy output is so dang high compared to everything else, which I found to be a lot more time saving when I was setting up my backbone for the power. The uranium ore deposits are basically unlimited once Kovacs is working, so you don't gotta worry about running out. And a lot of players do solar energy because of the light and load on your CPU. Once you get up to super high numbers, it can cause a crunch. However, I don't like the simplicity of the setup. It just doesn't tickle my fancy. Coal energy, of course, is an option, but the pollution is through the roof, and it burns through coal patches like no one's business. I don't like coal-powered electricity in real life, and I won't have it in my video games either. So we're arriving back at the factory. We're going to have to take a look at our Tier 1 sciences. Red science is, of course, the first and most simple science pack that exists in the game Factorio, so we'll go ahead and look at that one start to finish. The first thing we're going to do is follow the iron coming out of the ore rivers and onto our main belts. A series of balancers distributes the iron plates to many different processes, but the one I want to take a look at right now is gear production. Now what you're going to notice is the gear production is all set up right here on the bottom, and I do dump it back onto the main belt, which is a little unnecessary. If you go ahead and throw that on Reddit, they're going to call you out. The reason being, it's a 1-to-1 recipe, and so therefore there's no reason to throw a 1-to-1 recipe back on the main belt. Iron's already there. You just got to pull it out, put down one assembler wherever you want. It doesn't really make sense. I, however, didn't think that far ahead, and I built all my gear assemblers in one place. Just goes to show that even at 1000 SPM, you can still learn things about your factory basically every day. The red science assemblers do take that gear, the one assembler made product that it requires, and it combines it with the basic copper plate to make red science packs. This is a low-level refinement, and I'm happy to talk through each step. The red science packs are then put in the main belt and sent deeper into the factory, but for now this is where we're going to stop. Green Science is the next tier of Science Pack, and I feel like it's kind of a watershed mark for about 70% of the players of the game. To this point, you have to organize your assemblers to combine copper plate into copper wire, and copper wire with the iron for circuit boards with the gears to make the logistic arms with the conveyor belts to make the Green Science Packs. This kind of tooling is the meat and potatoes of Factorio, so either you've gotten this far, and it's felt a bit like work, and now you're playing something else, or you're one of those weirdos who gets off on this sort of thing, in which case, I'm happy to see you're part of the club. I'm not going to go into black science so much. I just wanted to highlight that the recipe is stone walls, hand grenades, and an assault rifle ammunition. It might seem a little odd that the guns become science in this game, but Factorio is thematically consistent, and I think you'll see this is pretty much par for the course. This pretty much completes the 3 science in my tier 1 loop. Now, if you are a young Factorio player just starting out, you might see some stuff on Reddit about a design called main bus. And if you're like me, you'll understand right away that it's a good design, and then you'll swear that you'll never use it, because you don't want to play the game the way that the internet tells you to. You're a free spirit after all, and you want your designs to be your own. I did come up with my own concepts to get around this, one of them being Sushi Belt, which I quickly learned already had a name and is extremely common for first-time players. The other being XY, which I do detail a little bit in a write-up of my game progress, which I'll link in the description below. I'll save you a whole thing though, and just tell you that I made a main bus anyways. It's pretty much an integral concept if you want to do a mega base. I don't think there's any shame in admitting that someone else was right. So this is main bus number 1. It circles the tier 1 sciences and occasionally intersects with main buses 2 and 3. We're going to go ahead and head to the second tier main bus for right now. Blue science is a recipe of sulfur, red circuits, and V6 engine parts. The V6 engine parts and circuits were pretty standard, so I'll share with you this little bit. The sulfur production was a pain in my dick hole. I just kept filling up the belts, couldn't get the right ratios of sulfur to sulfur acid facilities. I made this ugly loop design that just didn't work very well because the belts were completely saturated on the output leg. I made this band-aid where I looped the outputs to the middle and used long red slow arms to fix the problem. It's about as elegant as wet farts, but it did get the job done, and we're going to continue down for now. Engine production is pretty straightforward, just steel, gear, and pipe, but I will take a moment to highlight this design here. This is the bread and butter of my factory. 4-weave belts on either side of an assembler, fits evenly at 4 assemblers a pop. You can just pace this baby down and quickly scale to your needs for just about any recipe. Since each belt has 2 sides for a product, theoretically we can do 1-to-1 recipes all the way up to 7-to-1 and everything in between. There are no 7-to-1 recipes in Factorio, 5-to-1 is as high as it gets, but I still found this to be an incredibly versatile design, and you're going to see it just about everywhere in this factory. Going from green to blue science also means that you're going to need oil, which is another watershed moment for a lot of players. It's a totally new system, basically having nothing to do with the belts and the arms you've gotten used to. A lot of players do check out at this point. With a little bit of patience though, I think you'll find that it's the missing piece to the full portrait that is the video game Factorio. On this factory, I split oil production into 3 different sites across the map, figuring that I would need oil in a lot of different places, and this would make accessing it easier as the factory began to take shape. This ended up being the wrong idea. All my oil-based production processes are here. This wasn't really intentional at all, it just came together in that way naturally as I worked through the design of my factory. What this means is that the facility right here is doing the lion's share of the oil production work, while these other 2 are just supplementing it with these super long pipelines that were a total pain to build. If you do your own MEGAFACTORY, I would still recommend having a few different oil production sites because it is useful. Just keep in mind they don't need to be equal at all. One facility is going to do the heavy lifting, the rest are just nice to have. The plastic production is the most aesthetically pleasing part of the factory, in my opinion, so I hope everybody takes a look. The original design had lanes of 3 or 4 going to the 2 red circuit production facilities respectively, and the remaining was used for low density materials. I did find this to be a pain in the butt, mostly because I never did the logistics math to see where the plastic was needed, but also because the petroleum and coal supplies are inconsistent even when the factory is operating correctly. The solution was a massive balancer, which in reality is 4 balancers in a series of alternating 8x8s. Purple Science is a recipe of electric furnaces, railroad track, and production module 1. The biggest pain in the ass here honestly was the railroad production. Railroad just sits really fat in the belts, and the volume of the output from one assembly is much higher than just about anything else in the game, so I had a really hard time moving all this product to where it needed to be. The belts were just so full, the arms would just hang over them, doing nothing while they waited for a spot in the belt to open up. What resulted was a dramatic reduction in efficiency, something like 50%. I could have just doubled the amount of assemblers and called it a day, of course, but there's something about intentionally creating unused assemblers that just doesn't really sit. So instead, I toyed around with the input and output lanes, and this ugly-ass monster was born. I mean, no shade at this point, redesigns are a spark innovation, and thus the heart of the game. I gotta say, shit really pissed me off in the moment, though. Yellow Science was thankfully pretty straightforward. The recipe is blue circuits, flying robot flames, and low-density structures. None of the components by themselves are too particularly difficult. It's really just the scale of the operation that makes this challenge unique. I did run into a distinct buffer problem, where blue circuits are a bottleneck until this lane becomes completely full. This actually can go on for days if you just let it run, because production of the blue circuits barely outpaces consumption by the different processes. We're talking 1 or 2%. So I have to shut off all the science production and let this buffer fill, otherwise we'll be here all week. Speaking of which, now is a good time to go revisit the command center, so we're going to do that now. Okay, we're getting towards the end now, and I want to review the command center again. We did just cover all 6 of the major sciences, so here's a quick side note before we head to our rocket production and call it a day. This piece is super important for a project this size. As you can see, I have 4 different sections, one for trains, one for science production, one for rockets, and one for labs. Now turning off the trains does mean that no new materials come into the base. This, honestly, is huge. These other 3 sections just can turn off the major consumer portions of the base. This proved to be even more useful than I imagined it would during the testing phase. Turning off the rockets to make sure I have enough resources to test the labs, turning off the science to reduce the production of module 3s, that sort of thing. It's really just endlessly useful stuff. So get yourself a command center, have some fun with it, make it feel like home, and go for the vibes that make you enjoy the game. The third main bus loop, and of course the largest main bus loop, is pretty much solely dedicated to the materials that launch the rockets into outer space. On the north side, we have solid fuel production. Solid fuel production is interesting because it can be made from any of the 3 base oil products. You can see here, the production is computerized. It is set up to only create solid fuel from oil products that are in excess supply. And considering that rocket fuel modules require light fuel in particular, and petroleum is used exclusively in just about everything else, heavy oil ends up being what's left and thus becomes the solid fuel. To the east, we have low-density material production. It is the fattest bunch of assemblers in the entire build. Despite the large footprint, it was relatively easy design to come up with. Of course, the sheer volume of assemblers does still require that a great number of belts of input be available. So you can see that on the east, it becomes a bit of a spaghetti dinner, with input belts of copper and steel going in basically every direction. At the end of the day, only 1 belt is needed for low-density output. No need to be cute or tricky with it. You can see that the entire east side is almost all copper. This is because low-density materials are copy-thirsty as can be. And not only that, but there is blue circuit production to the south. We'll go ahead and check out blue circuit production now. Blue circuits are the 3rd and final component of rocket ship assembly. I will say, they probably are the highest tier of intermediate product in Factorio, and thus the one that you will spend the most time troubleshooting, not because blue circuits themselves are a particularly complicated recipe, but mostly because they sit at the top of every other system, meaning that just about any inefficiency in any other system in your base will result in the slow blue circuit production. So if you find yourself feeling like you spent the entire game troubleshooting blue circuits only, it's probably because you have. Rocket silos are, of course, the top tier of Factorio tech tree, and in this particular factory design, pretty much the dead center of the base. I want to take a moment to zoom out and talk about the overall flow of the factory. The least complicated raw materials are all the way out in the outskirts, in all directions, 360 degrees from the center. The center of the factory is, of course, rockets, the highest tier of sophistication. The first level of refinement, of course, happens at the outside edge of the factory, at the smelters, and the basic rule is that the closer you get to the center of the factory, the more complicated and higher tier the recipe becomes. This sort of outside-in design reminds me of a star, with the burning center being the highest, and thus became the namesake of the factory itself, which I do call MEGAFACTORY. It's my personal belief that every factory should have a name. The names I chose for mine were Assembly A, Iron Outpost, Assembly B, Delta Assembly, Forest Base, Factory Nameless, Ribbon Base, Base 2, and then, of course, the MEGAFACTORY. Now, the belts and the inputs for the rocket silos does look like kind of a jumbled mess, but I was really going for a sort of computer-looking CPU design, and I'll be honest, I don't think I missed the mark by too much. We're getting close to the end here, and now we're going to watch some rockets go off. This is the heartbeat of the operation, so we'll stand here a minute and see if we see one go off. It's an average of 1 rocket launch every minute. The rockets go up into space and bring back 1,000 white science packs, which are then put on the belts and thrown down the pipe. This is basically what SpaceX does, except theirs crash, and mine don't. The US government used to do this sort of thing too, before the public decided that space travel was a little too ambitious for the world's largest nation state, and that it should just be the playground for billionaires who make rockets exclusively shaped like dicks. I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and again, if you like this sort of thing, there's more description below. The last stop on our tour is the labs. We'll let the footage roll and simply behold what there is to come in store. Our lab design is pretty self-explanatory. It's a Christmas tree made out of science labs. The rainbow science packs go up, and the magic tree converts them into technology. Mechanical arms feed them in an outward and downward direction, meaning the tips of the trees are always full, and the top tenor is the last lab to fill up. I made it look like a Christmas tree because I thought it would look cool and I wanted to get clicks on Reddit. But I'll be honest and tell you, this was a huge pain in the ass design. It does feel pretty good now that it's done. Technologies in Factorio are infinite, so right now we're working on improved mining production, but who knows what the future holds. I want to thank everybody for watching once again. I'll leave you here with the ambient noise of the factory to close this video out. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Take care.